When outcast Omega Mira shelters a bleeding stranger during a vicious storm, she doesn't realize she's just saved the Wolf King himself, the very sovereign whose guards she's spent years hiding from. But when rival wolves come hunting for him at dawn, will her forbidden feelings and hidden strength be enough to protect the man who's already claimed her heart? The massive black wolf crashed through Mira's vegetable garden, like death itself was chasing him. She dropped her water bucket, watching in horror as the enormous creature stumbled and collapsed just 10 feet from her cottage door, his dark fur matted with blood that steamed in the freezing air. Every instinct screamed at her to run. Wolves this size didn't exist in the wild. Only the royal bloodline carried such power. But as thunder rumbled overhead and the first fat snowflakes began to fall, the injured animal let out a whimper, so human, so desperate, that her heart cracked open despite her fear. "Easy," she whispered, approaching slowly with her hands visible. "I won't hurt you." The wolf's massive head lifted, and she gasped. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, intelligent and aware in a way that made her skin prickle. This wasn't just any shifter. The scent rolling off him spoke of authority, of power that could command entire packs with a single howl. Lightning split the sky, and the wolf shuddered. The change began slowly, bones cracking and reforming, fur melting away to reveal pale human skin. Mira had seen dozens of transformations in her old pack, but never one that radiated such raw strength. When the shifting finished, a man lay bleeding in her ruined carrots, his dark hair plastered to his skull, and his muscled body covered in claw marks that looked suspiciously like they came from other wolves. "Please," he gasped, his voice rough as gravel. "Sanctuary." Mira knew she should say no. 3 years ago, her birth pack had cast her out for refusing to submit to their beta male's claiming bite. Since then, she'd survived alone on the kingdom's edge, keeping her head down and avoiding anything that might bring the king's attention to her door. Harboring wounded strangers, especially powerful ones, was exactly the kind of trouble that could get an outcast Omega killed. But the storm was getting worse by the minute, and the man was losing too much blood. Even if she wanted to turn him away, he'd never make it to the next settlement alive. And there was something about the way he'd asked, not demanded. Despite the authority in his scent that reminded her of her own desperate nights alone in the cold. "Just until the storm passes," she said firmly, though her hands were already moving to help him. "Then you leave." He nodded weakly as she got her shoulder under his arm, surprised by how much he weighed. Most of it was muscle, she realized, the kind that came from years of serious fighting. His skin was fever-hot against hers, and up close she could see more scars crossing his chest and back. This man had seen real battles, not just pack squabbles. Getting him inside took all her strength. Her cottage was small, one room with a sleeping area, a cooking space, and a fireplace that barely kept the winter chill at bay. She'd built it herself after her exile, learning carpentry and stonework through trial and error. It wasn't much, but it was hers. The stranger collapsed onto her bed with a groan that made her wolf want to comfort him. She forced the instinct down. Helping him didn't mean getting attached. "What's your name?" she asked, filling a basin with water to clean his wounds. "Aldrich," he said after a pause that felt too long. "And you?" "Mira." She dipped a cloth in the warm water, trying not to notice how his muscles tensed when she touched him. "What happened to you?" Another pause. "Bandits. They didn't expect me to shift." It was a lie. She could smell the deception on him. But she'd learned not to push for truths that might be dangerous to know. Instead, she focused on the deep gashes across his ribs, cleaning them as gently as possible while he hissed through gritted teeth. "These need stitching," she said. "It's going to hurt. I can handle pain." She believed him. Everything about this man spoke of someone who'd endured worse than needle pricks. As she worked, threading the wounds closed with careful precision, he watched her with those strange gray eyes. She'd expected judgment Omegas weren't supposed to live alone, weren't supposed to be skilled with healing arts. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like wonder. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I had to be. Out here, there's no pack healer to call." She tied off the last stitch and reached for the jar of healing salve she'd made from forest herbs. "This will help them heal faster." As she spread the mixture over his wounds, his skin warmed even more under her touch. The scent of him was changing too, becoming less wild and more interested. It made her own body respond in ways she'd forgotten were possible. She pulled back quickly. "You should rest. The fever will get worse before it gets better." "Mira?" Her name sounded different in his rough voice. "Thank you." Something in his tone made her look at him again. There was gratitude there, yes, but also surprise, as if kindness was the last thing he'd expected to find. It made her wonder what kind of life he'd lived. What had put those old scars on his body and that wariness in his eyes? Outside, the storm was building to a fury that rattled her windows and sent snow spiraling past in thick sheets. She banked the fire and settled into her chair by the hearth, close enough to watch over her patient, but far enough to keep her thoughts from wandering into dangerous territory. But as his breathing deepened into sleep and the wind howled around her small cottage, Mira couldn't shake the feeling that this storm had brought her more than just a wounded stranger. Something was about to change in her carefully ordered world, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. The man called Aldrich stirred in his sleep, muttering words she couldn't quite catch. But one phrase came through clearly, spoken with the weight of someone used to being obeyed. "My kingdom must protect." 3 days later, Mira woke to find Aldrich sitting up in bed, his fever finally broken, and those storm-gray eyes fully alert for the first time since his arrival. The sight of him conscious and watching her sent a jolt through her system that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way morning light caught the strong lines of his face. "You stayed," he said, his voice still rough but stronger than before. "Where else would I go? It's my house." She tried to sound casual as she stirred the pot of rabbit stew that had been simmering all night. The truth was, she'd barely slept, too aware of his presence in her small space, and too worried about his wounds reopening. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, testing his balance. The movement made her healing, stitches pulled tight across his ribs, and she caught herself stepping forward before forcing herself to stop. He wasn't her responsibility beyond basic hospitality. "The storm's past," she said instead, nodding toward the window where bright sunlight showed the world buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. "Roads should be clear by tomorrow." Something flickered across his face disappointment, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Of course, you've done more than enough." But he made no move toward his clothes, which she'd cleaned and mended while he fought his fever. Instead, he stood slowly and walked to her window, looking out at the forest with an expression she couldn't read. "Tell me about this place," he said. "How long have you lived here alone?" The question was casual, but there was an intensity in his posture that made her nervous. 3 years, since I left my birth pack." "Left? Or were cast out?" Her hands stilled on the wooden spoon. Most people were too polite or too afraid to ask directly. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." He turned from the window, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like understanding. Pack law can be harsh, especially for those who don't fit the expected roles. There was personal experience in his voice, which surprised her. He carried himself like someone used to being obeyed, not someone who'd ever been on the wrong side of pack judgment. "I refused a claiming bite from the beta male," she said finally. "The pack leaders decided I was too proud for my position." And what position was that supposed to be? Omega, bottom of the hierarchy, meant to submit and serve and never ask questions. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended, but I wanted to choose my own path. "So you chose exile over forced submission." There was approval in his tone now, and something that might have been respect. "That takes courage." Mira laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Courage? I've been scraping by for 3 years, living like a hermit because I was too stubborn to accept my place. Some days I think the pack was right. Maybe I am too proud for my own good." "No." The word came out sharp enough to make her look at him. Never think that. The ability to choose your own path, even when it costs you everything, that's not pride, that's strength. Something in his voice made her study his face more carefully. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of heavy responsibilities, and a sadness that seemed bone deep. You sound like you know something about difficult choices. More than I'd like. He was quiet for a long moment, then seemed to shake off whatever dark thoughts had claimed him. This stew smells incredible. I haven't had a home-cooked meal in longer than I care to remember. The word home hung between them, and Mira felt her cheeks warm. She ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls, hyper-aware of how domestic the scene looked. When was the last time she'd shared a meal with someone? When was the last time her cottage had felt like more than just a place to survive? So, what about you? She asked as they sat across from each other at her small table. What's your story? And don't tell me more lies about bandits. Your scars are too precise for random attacks. Aldrich paused with his spoon halfway to his mouth. What makes you think they're precise? I've seen battle wounds before. These came from claws and fangs, from shifters who knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. That's not bandit work. That's trained fighters. He set down his spoon, studying her with new attention. You're more observant than most. Living alone teaches you to read danger signs. So, what's the real story? For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. I serve the crown. There are those who would prefer a different ruler, and they're not particular about how they express their opinions. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't completely false either. Mira could sense the careful balance in his words' honesty, wrapped around a deeper secret. The king has enemies? She asked. Every ruler does. Power creates opposition by its very existence. His gray eyes met hers. But enough about politics. Tell me about your healing skills. Where did you learn? She let him change the subject, though part of her wanted to push for more answers. My grandmother was a pack healer before she died. She taught me what she could before the leadership decided I was too lowly to practice such arts. Idiots, he said with enough vehemence to surprise her. Healing is a gift that should be honored, not restricted by outdated hierarchies. You really don't think like most people, do you? I've learned that most people's thinking is limited by fear and tradition. The strongest packs, the strongest kingdoms are built by those willing to challenge both. There it was again. That tone of authority that suggested he was used to making decisions that affected more than just himself. But before she could ask about it, a sound outside made them both freeze. Horses. Multiple riders approaching fast. Aldrich was on his feet instantly, his body language shifting from relaxed to dangerous in a heartbeat. How many? Mira closed her eyes, using her enhanced hearing to count hoofbeats. 6, maybe 7, moving in formation. Guards, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her blood run cold. They're looking for me. What did you do? But even as she asked, pieces were clicking together in her mind. The authority in his scent, the precise battle wounds, his knowledge of politics and power. The horses were getting closer. Aldrich moved toward the window, his bare chest tense with controlled energy. Mira, listen to me carefully. When they get here, you've never seen me before. You've been alone for days. I don't understand. Promise me. He turned to face her, and she saw something desperate in his eyes. Whatever they say, whatever they threaten, you don't know anything about a wounded man. The sound of boots on her front steps cut off any response. A heavy fist pounded on her door, and a voice called out with the unmistakable ring of military command. Open up. By order of the crown, we're searching for the missing. But what they were searching for, and exactly who Aldrich really was, would have to wait for her to open that door and face whatever truth was about to shatter her quiet world forever. The stranger's fever came like a wild beast in the night. Mira woke to his harsh breathing and found his skin burning hot as summer stones. His massive frame shook the small bed she'd given him, and strange words poured from his lips, words about crowns and kingdoms, and battles that made no sense to a simple cottage dweller. The north border. Tell Commander Hayes. Wolves coming from the eastern pass. His voice cracked with pain and something that sounded like desperate worry. Mira pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, her own heart racing. Who was this man that spoke of commanders and borders? Her healing knowledge was small, just herbs her grandmother had taught her, and common sense born from years of surviving alone. But something deep in her chest wouldn't let her abandon him to the fever's grip. For 3 days, she barely left his side. She fed him tiny sips of willow bark tea when he could swallow. She changed the bandages on his wounds, trying not to notice how his scars told stories of countless battles. Most strange of all, she found herself talking to him as if he could hear every word. "You're safe here," she whispered on the second night, when nightmares made him thrash and call out warnings to people who weren't there. "No one will hurt you in my home." The way he settled at her voice made her wolf stir with feelings she didn't understand. This wasn't the calm comfort she'd give to any injured creature. This felt personal, important, like something inside her had been waiting for this exact moment without knowing it. On the third morning, everything changed. She was grinding herbs by the window when she heard him move differently. Not the restless tossing of fever, but the purposeful shift of someone truly waking up. When she turned, storm-gray eyes were watching her with complete awareness for the first time since his arrival. "You stayed," he said, his deep voice rough from days of silence. Heat rushed to Mira's cheeks. "You were sick. I couldn't just. Anyone would have." "No." He tried to sit up, winced, then tried again with stubborn determination that reminded her of the alpha wolves she'd once known. Anyone would have turned a bleeding stranger away from their door, especially during a storm like that. She moved to help him, her hands touching his arm to steady him. The contact sent sparks through her entire body, not just attraction, but something deeper, something that made her wolf want to curl up beside him and never leave. "I'm Aldrich," he said, and the name felt important in ways she couldn't explain. "Mira." She pulled her hands back, suddenly shy. Are you feeling better?" His smile transformed his entire face. Gone was the harsh mask of pain she'd grown used to, replaced by warmth that made her forget to breathe. "Much better, thanks to you." But as the day wore on, Mira began to notice things that made her uneasy. The way Aldrich carried himself, even injured, spoke of someone used to command. His hands were scarred from weapons, not farm work. Most puzzling of all, he seemed to know things about the kingdom that a simple traveler shouldn't know. "The eastern villages," he mentioned while she prepared their evening meal. "Have they been struggling with the wolf pack raids this winter?" Mira nearly dropped her wooden spoon. Those raids were barely talked about, even in the market towns. "How do you know about that?" For just a moment, something flickered across his face. Caution, maybe, or the look of someone who'd said too much. Travelers hear things, word spreads. But his answer felt hollow, like a door closing on truth she wasn't ready to hear. That night, as she settled into her chair by the fire, giving him the bed since he was still recovering, Mira found herself studying this man who'd stumbled into her quiet life. Everything about him seemed too large for her small cottage, too important for her simple world. "Aldrich," she said softly into the darkness, "what were you doing out in that storm?" "Really?" Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling fire and wind still howling outside. When he finally spoke, his voice carried weight that made her chest tight with unnamed worry. "Running from something I couldn't face," he admitted, "and maybe running toward something I didn't know I needed." The way he looked at her when he said it made Mira's heart skip like a stone across water. But beneath the warmth in his eyes, she glimpsed shadows of secrets that would change everything between them. She just didn't know how much. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning air like thunder, freezing Mira's blood in her veins. She dropped the bucket of water she'd been carrying from the well and ran to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Riders. At least 20 of them, moving fast across the snowy field toward her cottage. Even from a distance, she could see the red and gold banner snapping in the wind, colors that every person in the kingdom knew belonged to the royal guard. "Aldrich," her voice came out as a harsh whisper. "We have company." He was beside her in seconds, moving with speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone who'd been fevering 3 days ago. When he saw the approaching riders, his entire body went still in a way that reminded her of a wolf scenting danger. "You need to hide," Mira said, grabbing his arm. "The cellar under the kitchen. There's a loose board behind the grain sacks, if they're looking for someone." "No." His voice carried an authority that made her stop mid-sentence. "I won't leave you to face them alone." "Face them?" Fear made her voice climb higher. "I'm nobody. Why would the royal guard want anything with me?" But even as she said it, terrible understanding began to dawn. The way he moved like a born leader, his knowledge of military matters, the scars that spoke of battles fought for more than personal survival. The riders were close enough now that she could see their faces, hard men with the look of professional soldiers. At their head rode a man with graying hair and a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. When his eyes found her cottage, they narrowed with the focus of a hunting wolf. "Open in the name of King Aldrich Thornfield," the scarred man's voice boomed across the small clearing. "We seek our sovereign, wounded in battle 3 days past." The world tilted sideways. Mira's knees nearly buckled as the truth hit her like a physical blow. King Aldrich Thornfield, the Wolf King himself, the man she'd nursed through fever, whose forehead she'd cooled with her own hands, whose nightmares she'd soothed with gentle words. The most powerful alpha in the kingdom had been sleeping in her bed for 3 days. "Mira." His voice was gentle, but when she turned to look at him, she saw the truth written in every line of his face. The natural command, the way he'd known about the Eastern raids, the expensive fabric of his clothes, even torn and bloodied. "You're him," she whispered. "You're really him." Before he could answer, heavy fists pounded on her door. "Open, in the king's name." Mira's hands shook as she lifted the wooden latch. The scarred commander filled her doorway, his pale eyes taking in every detail of her simple home. Behind him, she could see more soldiers spreading out to surround the cottage. "I am Commander Hayes," he said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to instant obedience. "We have reason to believe our king sought shelter here during the storm. A woman matching your description was seen near the battlefield before his disappearance." The lie came to her lips without thought. "I haven't seen anyone, Commander. I've been alone since the storm started." Hayes studied her face with the intensity of someone trained to spot deception. "You're certain?" The king was gravely wounded. He would have needed help, shelter, healing. "I told you, I haven't." "She's telling the truth, Commander." Every head turned as Aldrich stepped into view. No longer the wounded stranger, but every inch the sovereign his men had risked their lives to find. Even injured, even in torn clothes, power radiated from him like heat from a forge. The change in the soldiers was immediate. 20 hardened warriors dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in perfect unison. "Your Majesty," Hayes breathed, and Mira heard relief and something like fear in his voice. "Rise," Aldrich commanded, then turned to Mira with eyes that held apology and something deeper, something that made her chest ache with confusion. "She gave me shelter when I needed it most. She asked no questions and demanded no payment. She is under my personal protection." Hayes's gaze shifted between them, calculating and sharp. "Of course, Your Majesty. We've brought fresh clothes, weapons, your horse. The kingdom awaits your return." But Aldrich didn't move toward his men. Instead, he stayed close to Mira, his presence both comforting and terrifying. She could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes studying her, measuring her worth, wondering what hold a simple cottage woman could have on their king. "The battle," Aldrich said to Hayes. "What news?" "Victory, sire, but costly. We lost 40 men, and the enemy's leader escaped into the northern mountains. There are reports of more raids planned, larger groups gathering." Hayes paused, his scarred face grave. "The kingdom needs you." Mira felt something inside her chest crack apart. Of course, kings belonged to kingdoms, not to the women who happened to shelter them during storms. The past 3 days had been a dream, nothing more. "I'll gather your things," she said quietly, turning toward the cottage. Aldrich's hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. "Mira, wait." But she couldn't wait, couldn't stand there while reality crashed down around her like the walls of her small, safe world. She pulled free and fled inside, leaving the Wolf King to his duty and his destiny, neither of which included a place for her. Blood dripped from Aldrich's knuckles as he split firewood behind Mira's cottage, each swing harder than the last. The royal hunting party had left 3 hours ago, but their captain's suspicious glares still burned in his memory. Soon they would return with more questions, more soldiers, and Mira would pay the price for his lies. She appeared in the doorway carrying 2 steaming cups, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. "Your hands are shaking." "I'm fine." The axe bit deep into the log. "Liar." She set the cups on a tree stump and caught his wrist. "You haven't eaten since yesterday. You barely slept, and you keep looking toward the forest like wolves are coming." Aldrich's chest tightened. Wolves were coming, his own wolves, loyal to a crown that demanded everything and gave nothing back. "You don't understand what you've gotten into." "Then tell me." Her green eyes searched his face. 3 days ago, you were dying in my bed. Now you're chopping enough wood for an entire winter. What changed? Everything. The moment Captain Thorne had spoken his title aloud, the last threads connecting him to this simple life had snapped. Kings didn't get to play house in forest cottages. They didn't get to pretend they were ordinary men who could love ordinary women without destroying them. "I have to leave tonight," he said quietly. Mira's face went pale. "Because of who you are. Because of what I am." He threw down the axe. "You deserve better than stolen moments with a man who can never truly be yours." "Don't I get a say in what I deserve?" Her question hit him like a physical blow. When had anyone last asked what he wanted? When had anyone cared about his choice rather than his duty? "You don't know what you're asking," he whispered. "I'm asking for honesty." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender oil she used in her hair. "I'm asking you to stop deciding my fate without talking to me first." The words tumbled out before he could stop them. "I'm the Wolf King." Mira went very still. "What?" "Aldrich Greystone, first of his name, ruler of the Northern Territories." Each title felt like stones in his mouth. "The man your village pays taxes to. The king your former pack swore loyalty to before they cast you out." She stumbled backward. "That's impossible." "Is it? You've felt my alpha presence. You've seen how other wolves react to me." He gestured toward the forest. "Did you think that hunting party was searching for some random traveler?" Mira's hand flew to her throat. "The scars on your chest, battle wounds. 3 kingdoms tried to kill me before I turned 25. The nightmares about crowns and thrones. Not nightmares, memories." She sank onto the tree stump, staring at him like he'd grown a second head. "You're the Wolf King, the one they write songs about, the one who united the packs through conquest and fear." Fear. The word tasted bitter. "Yes, that's what I'm known for." "Then why?" She shook her head. "Why didn't you command me to help you? Why didn't you just take what you needed?" "Because for 3 days, you looked at me like I was worth saving." His voice cracked. "Not because I was useful or powerful or necessary for the kingdom's survival. Just because I was hurt and you couldn't stand to see another creature suffer." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You let me tend your wounds. You let me see you vulnerable. I let myself be human." He knelt before her. taking her hands in his scarred ones. For the first time in 10 years, I remembered what it felt like to be a man instead of a symbol. Your people need you. My people need their king, but I. He brought her knuckles to his lips. I need you. Mira pulled her hands free. This is madness. I'm nobody. An Omega who couldn't even hold her place in a border pack. You're the most powerful man in 3 kingdoms. Power means nothing without someone to share it with. Your court will never accept me. Then we'll change the court. She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. You can't rewrite centuries of tradition for one woman. Watch me. He cupped her face gently. I've spent my life doing what was expected, what was necessary, what was best for everyone but myself. For once, I want to choose, and I choose you, Aldrich. I love you. The words hung between them like a thrown gauntlet. I love your fierce independence. I love how you argue with me when you think I'm being foolish. I love the way you sing while you're cooking, and how you talk to the plants in your garden like they're old friends. You don't know me, she whispered. I know you have nightmares about being alone forever. I know you keep a knife under your pillow and dried wolfsbane by the door. I know you cry sometimes when you think no one's watching, mourning the pack family you lost. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I know you're brave enough to save a stranger's life, and strong enough to survive 3 winters completely alone. Those are just facts. No, they're the reasons I fell in love with you. Mira closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. This can't work. It's already working. He pressed his forehead to hers. 3 days ago, we were strangers. Now I can't imagine facing tomorrow without you. A distant howl echoed through the forest, long and mournful. Then another and another. Mira's eyes snapped open. That's not your hunting party. Aldrich was already on his feet, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent. Border wolves. At least 20 of them. They're heading this way. They know I'm here. His jaw clenched. Someone told them. Another howl, closer this time, aggressive, challenging. The cellar, Mira said urgently. You can hide until they pass. No. Aldrich's eyes began to glow with inner fire. I won't cower while they threaten you. They're not here for me. They're here for the Wolf King. Exactly. He began pulling off his shirt. Which means this is about to become very dangerous for anyone standing near me. Mira grabbed his arm. Don't be stupid. There are too many of them. Then we'd better even the odds. He looked at her meaningfully. How long since you've shifted? I don't shift anymore. Why not? Because, she hesitated, because my wolf isn't what my birth pack expected. The howls were getting closer. Aldrich could hear paws pounding through the underbrush now. Mira, I need you to listen very carefully, he said. Whatever they told you about your wolf, whatever made you believe you weren't strong enough, they were wrong. You don't understand. I understand that you've been hiding your true nature for 3 years. His hand found hers. But tonight, I need my queen beside me. Your what? The first wolf burst from the tree line. The silver wolf was massive, easily twice the size of any border pack member, with eyes like burning coals and scars crisscrossing his gray coat. Behind him came 19 others, all snarling, all focused on the cottage where the Wolf King's scent hung thick in the air. Mira felt her human form ripple with the urge to shift, but terror held her back. The last time she'd let her wolf free, her own pack had stared in horror. Some transformations were too dangerous to reveal. Shift now, Aldrich commanded, his own body beginning to blur and change. I can't. The silver wolf's head snapped toward her voice. He'd found them. Aldrich Greystone. The shift back to human form was seamless, revealing a scarred man with dead eyes and a cruel smile. The great Wolf King, hiding behind a peasant's skirts. Marcus Bloodfang, Aldrich replied without moving. Still compensating for your small pack with dramatic entrances, I see. Marcus laughed. My pack may be small, but we're smart enough to know opportunity when we smell it. A wounded king, far from his guards, with only one frightened Omega for protection. His gaze slid to Mira. Though she smells interesting. Touch her and die, Aldrich said simply. Big words from a man outnumbered 20-1. You're right. The odds are unfair. Aldrich's smile was all teeth. You should have brought more wolves. The change happened faster than lightning. One moment, Aldrich stood human and vulnerable. The next, a massive black wolf filled the space where he'd been larger than Marcus, larger than any wolf Mira had ever seen, with eyes like molten gold and power radiating from every line of his body. His roar shattered the cottage windows. 3 border wolves charged immediately. Aldrich met them head-on, his jaws closing around the first attacker's throat, while his claws raked the second. The third managed to bite his flank before being thrown 20 feet into a tree. But 17 wolves remained, circling now, looking for openings. From her position pressed against the cottage wall, Mira watched in fascinated horror. This was the Wolf King she'd heard stories about, the unstoppable force who'd united 3 kingdoms through sheer dominance. But even he couldn't fight them all. 2 wolves broke from the circle, heading straight for her. The Omega, Marcus called in human form. Take her alive. She'll make excellent leverage. Time slowed. Mira saw the first wolf's leap, saw the second one circling to cut off her escape. She heard Aldrich's enraged howl as he realized he couldn't reach her in time, and something inside her chest exploded. The shift took her like wildfire, burning away human limitations and fear. Her wolf surged forward, not the small, submissive creature her birth pack had expected, but something else entirely. She was white, pure white, from the tip of her nose to the end of her tail, with eyes like Arctic ice. But it wasn't her coloring that made the attacking wolves stumble to a halt. It was her size. Mira's wolf stood nearly as tall as Aldrich's, built for speed and power, with an aura of command that made several of the border wolves whimper and back away. Impossible, Marcus breathed. She's just an Omega. Mira's answering howl carried harmonics that made the forest itself seem to listen. Birds fell silent. Small animals fled. Even the wind held its breath. She wasn't just an Omega. She was an Alpha. The 2 wolves who'd been charging her skidded to a stop, suddenly uncertain. In the wolf world, alphas didn't fight other alphas lightly. The consequences could be catastrophic. But Marcus had committed too much to back down now. Kill them both, he snarled, shifting again. The bounty's still worth it. What happened next would be talked about in pack circles for generations. Aldrich and Mira moved like they'd been fighting together for years instead of seconds. Where he was raw power, she was liquid grace. Where she was speed, he was unbreakable defense. They flowed around each other in perfect synchronization, each protecting the other's weaknesses. The border wolves had expected to overwhelm 2 opponents. Instead, they found themselves fighting a single, deadly entity with 4 sets of claws and tactical intelligence that adapted faster than they could react. Mira's wolf darted between legs, hamstringing attackers for Aldrich to finish. Aldrich's bulk-absorbed charges meant for her, throwing enemies into her waiting teeth. They communicated through movement and instinct, their combined presence so dominant that 3 of the smaller wolves simply fled. Marcus realized too late that he'd made a fatal mistake. The fight turned when one of his lieutenants got lucky, catching Mira across the ribs with claws that drew blood. Her pained yelp sent Aldrich into a rage that turned the battle from tactical to personal. His roar echoed for miles. The remaining border wolves broke ranks, suddenly remembering why their ancestors had sworn loyalty to the royal bloodline. This wasn't just any alpha defending his territory. This was the Wolf King protecting his chosen mate. Marcus found himself alone, facing 2 predators who looked at him like he was already dead. "Wait!" he gasped, shifting back to human form. "I surrender. The old laws." Aldrich's shift was seamless. The old laws say challengers who threaten the royal mate forfeit their lives. She's not your mate. She's nobody. Mira shifted beside Aldrich, her human form bleeding but unbroken. I'm the woman who's going to watch you pay for this. You can't. I have rights as a pack leader. You had rights, Aldrich corrected, until you attacked what's mine. Marcus's eyes darted between them, seeing his death written in their faces. The other packs will hear of this. They'll know you've gone soft, choosing an outcast over political alliance. Let them hear. Aldrich stepped forward. Let them know their king has found his queen, and what happens to anyone who threatens her. This isn't over, Marcus snarled. Yes, Mira said quietly. It is. The silver wolf tried one last desperate charge. He never reached them. As Marcus's body hit the ground, the forest fell silent except for the distant sound of the remaining border wolves fleeing toward their own territory. They would carry news of this night back to their pack, and from there it would spread to every corner of the kingdom. The Wolf King had chosen his queen, and she was magnificent. The castle bells rang like thunder, but Mira couldn't hear them over the pounding of her own heart. She stood in the great throne room, still wearing her simple brown dress, surrounded by nobles in silk and gold who whispered behind jeweled fans. Their eyes burned with curiosity and judgment, and Omega, a commoner, a nobody who had somehow captured their king's attention. She smells like dirt, one duchess muttered. Look at those calloused hands, another snickered. Mira's wolf wanted to bare her teeth and show these perfumed peacocks what real strength looked like, but doubt crept in like winter fog. Maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong here among marble columns and crystal chandeliers. Maybe saving Aldrich had been the biggest mistake of her life. The massive oak doors burst open with a crash that silenced every whisper. King Aldrich strode in, his black hair still damp from his bath, wearing the royal blue coat that marked his station. But his eyes, those storm gray eyes that had looked at her with such tenderness by her cottage fire, now seemed cold as winter steel. Your Majesty. The nobles bowed like wheat in the wind. Mira's heart sank to her boots. This wasn't the man who had carved her wooden wolf pendant. This was the king, wearing power like armor, surrounded by people who had never bled for him or held him through fever dreams. She was just the peasant girl who had bandaged his wounds. Lady Mira? His voice echoed off the stone walls, formal and distant. Lady? She almost laughed. 3 days ago, she had been milking her goat and mending her roof. Now she stood in a palace, being called a title she'd never earned. The whole thing felt like a cruel joke. Your Majesty, she whispered, dropping into the clumsy curtsy the castle servants had tried to teach her that morning. But then something shifted in his expression, a crack in the royal mask. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of pine and leather that belonged to the man, not the king. His hand found hers, warm and steady. Tell them, he said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. Tell them how we met. Mira's throat went dry. The nobles leaned forward like hungry wolves scenting prey. One wrong word and they'd tear her apart with gossip and spite. But Aldrich squeezed her fingers, and she remembered the fevered man who had trusted her with his life. He came to my door in a storm, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word, bleeding and broken. I didn't ask his name or rank. I saw someone who needed help, so I helped. And when the enemy came for him, Aldrich prompted, I fought. The memory of silver claws and snapping teeth made her spine straighten. We fought together. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Fighting alongside the king, unthinkable for a mere Omega. Show them, Aldrich said, his eyes blazing with pride and something deeper. Mira's wolf stirred, sensing challenge and approval in equal measure. Without thinking, she let her true nature surface, not the cowering creature her birth pack had expected, but the alpha strength that had been sleeping in her blood all along. Power rolled off her in waves that made several nobles step back, their own wolves recognizing superior force. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had faced death and won. "I am Mira Thornwick," she declared, using the name she had chosen for herself after her exile. "I have no royal blood, no noble title, no grand estates. But I have something more valuable." She looked directly at Aldrich, seeing the man behind the crown. "I have earned my place here with loyalty, courage, and love freely given." The silence stretched like a held breath. Then, to everyone's shock, the king dropped to one knee before her. The nobles gasped. Kings knelt to no one, but Aldrich's eyes never left hers. "Mira Thornwick," he said, his voice carrying the weight of royal decree, "you saved my life when you owed me nothing. You stood beside me in battle when running would have been safer. You saw the man behind the crown when everyone else sees only the title." He pulled a simple silver ring from his pocket, not the massive royal jewels in the treasury, but something he had clearly chosen himself. "Will you marry me? Not because I command it, but because you choose it?" The question hung in the air like morning mist. Mira looked at the ring, at the man offering it, at the crowd of nobles whose jaws had dropped to the marble floor. A week ago, she had been nobody. Now she stood at the center of a kingdom's future. But more than that, she stood at the center of a choice that would define her life. She could say no, walk away, return to her cottage and her simple existence. Aldrich would let her go. She could see it in his eyes, the painful acceptance that she might reject everything he offered. Or she could say yes, accept the ring, the crown, the weight of ruling beside him, face the challenges and the whispers and the enormous responsibility of helping guide a kingdom. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." The ring slipped onto her finger like it had been waiting for her all along. When Aldrich stood and kissed her, the throne room erupted in cheers, some genuine, some polite, all acknowledging that their world had just changed forever. But Mira barely heard the noise. In Aldrich's arms, surrounded by marble and gold, she felt the same warmth she had known in her tiny cottage. Love wasn't about crowns or titles. It was about two people choosing each other, again and again, no matter what the world thought. Spring painted the kingdom in shades of hope, and Queen Mira stood in her private garden, watching the sun set over lands that now called her their own. 6 months had passed since the throne room proposal, but it felt like a lifetime of learning, growing, and discovering what it truly meant to rule with both strength and compassion. The roses she had planted were blooming simple wildflowers mixed with royal breeds, creating something entirely new and beautiful. Much like the kingdom itself under her and Aldrich's joint leadership, the council meeting ran late again. Aldrich's voice came from behind her, warm with affection despite his obvious exhaustion. She turned, smiling at the sight of her husband, still strange to think that word, loosening his formal collar as he approached. The crown had been set aside hours ago, leaving just the man she had fallen in love with by firelight. "Lord Marcus still thinks women shouldn't have opinions about trade routes," she guessed, settling onto their favorite stone bench. "Lord Marcus is learning that his new queen has very strong opinions about everything." Aldrich sat beside her, immediately relaxing in the one place where they could simply be themselves. "Your proposal for the northern roads convinced even the stubborn old goats. Commerce will flow better, and the border villages will finally have proper protection." Mira felt a glow of satisfaction. Those border villages reminded her of her old life, isolated, vulnerable, forgotten by those in power. Now she could actually help them, could use her position to make real changes that mattered. "Speaking of changes," she said, pulling a letter from her pocket, "this came today." Aldrich read quickly, his eyebrows rising. "Your old pack wants to reconcile after they cast you out?" Apparently, having their former Omega become queen makes them reconsider their harsh judgment. Mira's laugh held no bitterness those old wounds had healed, replaced by a confidence she never could have imagined. They're requesting a formal meeting to restore family bonds. "What will you tell them?" Mira considered this, The scared, lonely girl who had been driven from her pack would have leaped at the chance for acceptance. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned her worth came from within, not from others' approval. I'll meet with them, she decided. Not because I need their acceptance, but because forgiveness is stronger than grudges. And maybe some good can come from showing them how much I've grown. Aldrich's arm slipped around her shoulders, pulling her close. Have I mentioned lately how proud I am of the queen you've become? Queen, Mira repeated, still sometimes amazed by the title. A year ago, I was milking goats and patching roof holes. Now I'm negotiating treaties and hosting foreign diplomats. And doing it better than nobles who were born to the role, Aldrich pointed out, because you understand what it means to struggle, to fight for every small victory. That perspective makes you a better ruler than someone who never had to earn their place. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the first stars appear. In the distance, the castle hummed with activity servants, preparing for tomorrow's events, guards changing shifts, the constant pulse of a kingdom at peace but always ready. Do you ever miss it? Aldrich asked quietly. The simplicity of your cottage? The quiet life? Mira thought about this seriously. She did sometimes miss the peaceful mornings, the satisfaction of work done with her own hands, the freedom from constant responsibility. But missing something didn't mean regretting its loss. I miss parts of it, she admitted, but I wouldn't trade this life for that one. Here, I can help thousands instead of just myself. I can protect people who have no other protector. I can love you without hiding or fear. She turned to face him fully. Do you miss being just a king instead of a husband? His smile was answer enough, but he spoke anyway. Being king was duty. Being your husband is joy. The crown feels lighter when I share its weight with someone who chose to carry it beside me. A shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, brief and brilliant. Mira made no wish she had everything she could possibly want right here. A man who loved her completely. A position where she could make real change. And the knowledge that she had found her true strength not in submission or rebellion, but in choosing her own path. Race you to the tower? She challenged, her wolf stirring with playful energy. In human form or wolf? Aldrich's eyes gleamed with mischief. Human. I want to give you a fighting chance. They ran through the castle corridors like children, laughing and breathless, past tapestries depicting the kingdom's history. Someday their story would join those ancient tales, the outcast Omega who became queen, the lonely king who learned to trust love over power. At the tower's top, breathless and victorious Mira had won by a nose they looked out over their kingdom. Lights twinkled in village windows, smoke curled from cottage chimneys, and somewhere in the distance, wolves sang to the rising moon. No regrets? Aldrich asked, echoing the question that had become their private ritual. Mira leaned into his warmth, feeling the absolute rightness of this moment, this life, this love they had built together from a simple act of kindness during a storm. None, she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The kingdom slept peacefully below them, protected by a king and queen who had learned that true strength came not from power over others, but from the courage to open your heart to love, even when the world said it was impossible.